Let's get more from Washington, D.C., and we welcome John Frisbie, who's the president of the U.S. China Business Council, representing some 250 American companies trying to do business in China. John, good evening to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Let's get more on what happened yesterday, the transgressions there. So the harsh sentence, we have 7 to 14 years for some of these Rio Tinto employees. Let me just ask you first off, what has been the reaction so far from your constituents?
Well, first, good morning, Susan. I think the reaction from American companies that are members of the U.S. China Business Council all along has been to wait and see what the facts of the case are. And that's been the one thing we've been reminding everyone to follow. We've now got the verdict. I'm going to leave it to the legal experts to determine the sentencing and whether it's appropriate or anything else that's related to the intricacies of the Chinese legal system. But certainly from your lead-in, Rio Tinto itself, I think today acknowledged there were transgressions, and it's important to keep that in mind. I think for American companies, there's been one reminder from all of this. I think we have to be careful to extrapolate too much from it, but there's one reminder all along that's been important, and that is U.S. companies and executives operating overseas are subject to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and companies need to make sure, if it wasn't already clear, from this case, it's a reminder that companies need to make sure that they need to ensure that their executives operating overseas are familiar with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and what it allows and what it doesn't.
Yeah, let's talk about the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in China, because a lot of the case was held behind closed doors. So a lot of people are questioning, when you say someone stole commercial secrets, I mean, what exactly is stealing commercial secrets in China?
Well, transparency is always a good thing, and that's something we urge upon the Chinese authorities at all times. And we think there ought to be a good definition or a clear definition between, say, state secrets or commercial secrets. And we've made those views known as well. Confidence for investors does revolve around transparency, so that's why we encourage China to continue to move along that road. But again, in this particular case, Rio Tinto itself has said transgressions were involved. I think we just have to keep that in mind.
Okay, if that's the case, let's move on then and add this Rio Tinto trial and this case and this verdict now to what happened to Google on the mainland, which of course is trying to, it looks like it is trying to pull out of the mainland at this point. So with these cases fresh on the mind of people trying to do business in China, you know, what sort of advice and what are they saying in terms of how hard it is to actually do business on the mainland these days?
Well, the Google situation, again, is one that I would caution is probably more particular to their industry sector and their set of circumstances in China than something I would apply broadly to U.S. companies in China. I mean, clearly, Google faced a difficult decision in terms of how it was going to operate there, and they've made different decisions at different times during the course of their time in China, and at this point, they felt like withdrawal was the way they wanted to go. But it's a difficult decision to make. I mean, on the one hand, do you stay there? Do you try to work for improvements by remaining engaged? On the other hand, do you make a statement? And I think there's merits to both sides, and reasonable people can argue on both sides. But we have to keep in mind that for Google and the handful of companies, American companies that operate in that information space, they're in a unique sector in China where there's a lot of controls, there is censorship, and in order to operate there, they do have to make those difficult decisions, whereas the other 99% of U.S. companies operating in China don't face those kind of difficult challenges.
Okay, so why do you think Chinese policies seem to indicate and tilt towards the favor of Chinese companies right now?
Well, now you're starting to get into issues I think do cause concern for a broader range of American companies. U.S. companies are committed to the relationship with China, and clearly China has become an important market for American companies, over the last decade in particular. But there are real concerns in the business community now about the trend of China's policies and whether in the years ahead China will be more or less open for foreign companies operating there. There is a umbrella of national economic security in China that overarches a number of policies that suggest perhaps China wants to protect its companies more.
John Frisbie, thank you so much for your time today.